everyone. Halito Chumachekma. My name is Johnnie J, and I am from the Oto, Missouri, and Choctaw tribes of Oklahoma. I'm the founder of a tribe called Geek and one of the co-founding board members of Not Your Mascots and Live Indigenous OK. I like to say that I was born an Indigenerd. I came into the world blowing spit bubbles, and I've been geeking out ever since. And today I am joined by some wonderful Indigenerds that I've had the pleasure of working with for many years now, and they have done such incredible work. So I am going to let them introduce themselves, and we are going to start with Noetta Harjo.
Hey, my name is Noetta. I am Osage, Muskogee Creek and Seminole from Oklahoma. I am a writer I'm the new news editor for Geek Girl Authority. We are a pop culture site that covers all realms of pop culture, movies, games, TV shows. And I also have a column called the Indigenerd Wire that is dedicated to Indigenous peoples in pop culture. So, hello, everybody.
Okay, and next we'll go to Sonya.
Hi everybody, Tensei. I'm Sonya Ballantyne. I am Swampy Cree from the Mistapaistic Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, Canada. I am a writer and a filmmaker and a public speaker. I once opened for George Takei, which was the only reason I did it, because I did not get paid for that job, but I am a huge nerd. I did a TEDx on the importance of Superman and Star Trek to my Indigenous identity, and I may or may not be writing for a game that you may know. So it's all under wraps right now. But yeah, that's me.
Okay, and next we'll go to Kayla Shaggy.
Hello, my name is Kayla Shaggy. I am of the Dene and Anishinaabe tribes. Basically what I do is I work as a cultural consultant, and I also make my own media. I've made an Indigenous futurist comic book called The Sixth World, and I also participate in other zines relating to Indigenous futurism and Indigenous art. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Okay, well, today we are going to talk about our experiences as being Indigenous women in geek culture. We're going to talk about some of the representation that we see in pop culture and how that kind of puts us at odds with mainstream, pop culture, and also, just being creators. And so, for me, I grew up a geek. I started out with Star Wars, Star Trek. My family is actually very divided between the two. So it's a heated argument every time we get together. Are you Star Trek? Are you Star Wars? And it's a heated debate still to this day. And, I think it's interesting how Indigenous people come into pop culture and how we start getting involved in these fandoms, and when we start developing an interest in comic books and what that means for us as Indigenous people in terms of helping us to come to terms with our identity as Native people in a contemporary world. And so my first question for our panelists tonight is, when did you first discover that you were an Indigenerd? And I'm going to throw this question first over to Kayla.
I guess when I first found out is when I just kind of started talking to friends I had made in college, other Indigenous people, and we were talking about why we liked anime so much, specifically Studio Ghibli, and we were approaching it from an Indigenous viewpoint, the animism and relationship with the land within the movie Princess Mononoke and the Princess of Nausicaa. And it was just kind of this moment, whoa, I'm a really big nerd, and I really like analyzing stuff and then putting it into context of my Indigenous background.
And what about you, Sonya?
I knew I was a nerd when I first read The Hobbit when I was a little kid. That was the big one. I loved The Hobbit. I thought it was it was the first book I ever read that made me feel like an adult, even though technically it's a children's book, but it was the first novel I had ever read. And I was about 4 or 5 when I read it. And it basically was the first time I ever felt like I saw somebody like me in a book, because my finger slipped there. Sorry. So I really enjoyed it just because I saw a lot of Cree culture in Bilbo, and I saw a lot of myself in that. Like, he loved home, but he sensed that there was more out there for him, and so that really connected with me. Plus, I really love eagles, and when I was a little kid, my uncle gave me a huge eagle feather for my powwow regalia, and I thought he got it from the Lord of the Eagles and the Hobbit. So that was when I knew I was a nerd. So.
And what about you, Noetta?
You know, I feel like I've always been a nerd or a geek because it was always so normalized in my household. I can remember my dad watching Doctor Who. I didn't understand it, but I was watching it along with him, that and Star Trek. And I can remember going to see The Empire Strikes Back, and it just seemed like it was just always there. It was always a part of me. So I don't know that I ever really there was a moment that I discovered it was just always there. Unfortunately, I didn't really see parts of me in any of the characters until I became older. And then I was like, oh, you know what? That Yoda, he sounds like an old Indian man that I've seen, that I've talked to before. So it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized, hey, you know, there's a little bit of Indigenous in there. So, but yeah, it's always been a part of me.
You know, I think that's very true because, you know, I'm Team Star Wars. That's the hill I will die on. And I grew up in the fandom, and the fandom, you know, it's changed so much. It's so contentious these days, and it's really kind of sad to me because growing up, you know, we struggle to find our place in this world. And for me, it was that Star Wars fandom. You know, I'm a suicide survivor, and I contribute a lot of my healing to the Star Wars fandom because that's the only place where I found acceptance and where people treated me like I was no different, that I wasn't the weird kid that tried to end their life. You know, I wasn't just othered. They just accepted me fully. And it's the same thing. Like growing up, you find people wearing a Star Wars t-shirt, and you could be out on the street. And if they're a fan, they see the shirt and you automatically have a new friend. And you'll spend hours having a new discussion with someone you've never met before just because they love the same thing that you do. So my next question is, what are some of the fandoms that you really enjoy, that you really connect with, and, you know, will argue on Twitter and take down those trolls just to get your point across on this? And for this one, I'm going to start with Noetta.
I think the only fandom that I've actually had to go and defend on Twitter or any platform has been the Dune series. Just because, I guess because it's been most popular here, really. A lot of people have been talking about it, and the new trailer came out today. But I just remember there was somebody who was like, oh, this sounds really boring. And I was like, no, it's not boring. And, you know, just kind of went off on why it wasn't boring. But, you know, other fandoms that I really feel connected to are definitely the Star Wars, the Lord of the Rings saga, and for some reason, Harry Potter. I know that's such a British story, and there's really no identifying, but I guess just the coming of age and the struggle of wanting to be accepted, that's that side of the Harry Potter stories.
And Kayla?
Mute myself. You know, I was thinking, and I would have to say Godzilla. You know, I just grew up watching Godzilla movies with my dad, and then as I got older and, you know, researched it, and then I've also been to Japan, and I kind of took this class on monsters and myth in Japan. So it's kind of like, I'll often run into people who are just like, oh, it's just big, silly rubber suit monsters beating each other. And it's all, first of all, let me tell you a thing about atomic weapons, atomic history, Japanese war history, you know, I'll just and recontextualizing it within an American perspective. So I would say, you know, Godzilla fandom is one I'm really close to.
What about you, Sonya?
My two biggest ones are probably Superman, which I've gotten into a lot of arguments online about, and Star Trek. Mostly because Superman was always a person like me in that he didn't know where he belonged. He knew he had a gift, but he had no idea how to utilize that gift. He loved home, he loved his parents, but something else was calling to him. And I always liked that idea that he still has a foot in Smallville villain afoot in Metropolis, and I always loved that about him. With Star Trek, I always saw it as this beacon of hope for me that there was going to be a future where my being a Native woman would not matter negatively, and that there was a place for me in that future. And so I very hardcore fight people who think that there is a place for bigotry and sexism and racism in the Star Wars fandom, specifically as it relates to Star Trek Discovery, which has like a Black female lead. So like I will basically just like tear people apart if they if they say something that I don't like in regards to Michael Burnham. So it's something that I'm really passionate about, and I keep throwing my business card whenever I get into the Star Trek people to let me write for that series. So that's my big goal right now.
I know, and how exciting, like for there to be Indigenous representation in these fandoms, albeit sometimes they really fall short on how they include natives. I know the Harry Potter fandom was one of the most recent that was really questionable, and it was kind of sad to me because as a Choctaw woman, the way that they included Choctaw history in the Wizarding World, it showed that she took some time to learn about Choctaw history, even some of the variations that we've seen in the spelling of the word Choctaw itself, and even the native name that she chose she did a lot of research. But when you look at the other native elements that she tried to include, especially from like the Navajo culture, it really fell short. It seemed like she just grabbed bits and pieces without trying to understand how they exactly fit into the world, and it really epically failed. But what are some more of the problematic representations that we've seen in some of the fandoms that we love, and how did it make you feel as an Indigener that loves this fandom? Did it cloud your love for that fandom, or did it just make you want to go in and be like, hey, this is how we can fix this? And I'll throw this one to Sonya first.
Well, going back to Star Trek, I remember there was two distinct moments where there were native people on Star Trek, and there was that episode where they all wear buckskin, and in the Next Generation where they go to a planet that's inhabited entirely by native people that are getting relocated because the planet belongs to Cardassia. And so I was really pissed when I was a little girl watching that episode, because I'm like, it is 300 years in the frickin' future and we're still getting kicked out of places. And that bothered me so much, because I was like, and the biggest part that bothered me too is the fact that the leadership of that tribe was all men. And I'm like, that is not the way most tribes run. Like, a lot of us are matrilineal people, so that really bothered me that there wasn't at least one representative of that planet that was a woman. And we didn't even see that many native women in that episode. And though I did give it some points because it had Tom Jackson, who is Cree, on the show. So I was like, that's me on the show. That's like, so it had some points, but it feels like whenever there's Indigenous representation, it's like one step forward, 100 steps back. Like when they had, what's his name? Adam Beach in Suicide Squad. I had so many people were so excited to see him in that movie, and I was so certain. I'm like, okay, watch this. He'll die in the first 20 minutes to show how dangerous the situation is. And then he died 20 minutes into the movie to show how dangerous the situation was. So it's like, there are good things, but again, like sometimes it's bad, like with Chief and Wonder Woman. He's an amazing character, but there's still a scene where he uses a smoke signal and his name is Chief. So that was like, it's we're growing, but it's still like there's still no room for native women in those contexts, which is always drives me up the wall.
And what about you, Kayla?
So I know I mentioned Godzilla, and I was kind of nervous and didn't want to talk too much. But I would go on to say like monster media and horror media in general are like things that I'm like a big nerd about. You can't see it right now, but I have like a xenomorph figure in the corner over here in my room. But watching horror, and this is something that came up recently because of the recent episode of Lovecraft Country. It's like when natives see themselves in horror, we're often the victim, to show how, kind of like what Sonya said, how dangerous the stakes are, or we get maimed, or we're seen as this type of mystic to help the usually white hero or white family, or like in Stephen King or other media, Indian burial ground. And like, I'm a very avid horror fan, but there's just some stuff I can't watch because it's just so misinformed, misrepresented, you know. And it would be cool to see more takes on Indigenous horror, and we are seeing it, just, you know, not as much as we see other horror media from other countries, and, you know, namely Hollywood.
And Noetta?
Just to piggyback off of that, you know, the lack of representation is really that bothers me the most, because you know, if it's a movie that was set in the 1800s, you know, there's Native people everywhere. They don't talk. They're just there to help the white savior, you know, fix the problem or beat the monsters or something. In more modern times, we are less visible, I feel like, in the movies that are set in the more modern times. And it's almost like if they put an Indian person in there, they don't know what to do with them. So they just make them a sidekick or somebody who is easily expendable in like the first 20 minutes, like, you know, with Adam Beach. The only fandom that I've seen that I feel like has any kind of real, like, really good representation was The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, when they added a character who was Indigenous, who was trying to get his land back, and who was actually educated and could speak and was intimidating. And I'd like to see more of that, just more representation of us as educated people, as a modern person, and as future people as well.
Yeah, I think that's what's really hard, because I think as Indigenous people, to be in geek culture or pop culture in general, we really have to practice critical nerd theory. Like, we have to be able to acknowledge the problems with the representation or lack of representation that we see, but also acknowledge the positive. Because like with Harry Potter, you know, I kind of felt at odds, because a lot of people were just totally against everything that she did with how she included natives. That, you know, being Choctaw was like, well, she did this right, and it showed that she could. So what made me angry was the fact that she didn't show the same care or respect as she did to the Choctaw history as she with the rest of the history that she tried to include. And that was something I saw with the recent Lovecraft Country episode too, is that they wanted to try and include Indigenous representation. And that's good. But at the same time, you know, you need to collaborate with Indigenous creators, with writers, and you need to make sure that you get that history right, because we know as marginalized people, they get it wrong so often. And it really was kind of disappointing to me just to see how epically they failed in trying to include Indigenous representation, especially with how they portray Two-Spirit people and the way that they even define that, because our Two-Spirit people are so marginalized and the violence that they face is so horrific to this day. And so to see it being kind of used as entertainment, and I think that's one of the other things I really hate about the way that, you know, not just Indigenous people, but Black people as well, is when it comes to our representation, they take our real life horrors, that historical trauma and that history, and they reimagine it in even worse ways. It's almost like they're trying to act out their own worst fantasies of what they could or want to do to Black and brown bodies. And so that's what always kind of bugs me in the way that we see ourselves represented. And I'm glad that, you know, we're in this whole spectrum where we can have these conversations together, where we can reach out on social media, we can work with different creators, we can kind of help each other navigate that and get it right. And so many people are. And I think that's what I really like about being a geek now, is we're starting to see Indigenous people being included in a meaningful way. So that kind of brings me to this. What do you guys think about the new upcoming Marvel collaboration with Indigenous comic creators? And how does that kind of give you hope on the way that you as a creator yourself can find a place in modern and mainstream pop culture? And I'll throw this one over to Noetta.
When I first saw it, you know, the first thought that came to mind was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great for representation. Because it's going to be basically a retelling of the characters that were already established. But and it's great that they're getting their own comic, you know, and that they're pushing this promotion like they are, and they're using Native artists and they're using Native authors to tell these stories. I guess the thing I'm really kind of weary about is that, and just because from the other creators and the Indigenous storytellers, I know once it gets to a certain point in a big conglomerate like Marvel, somebody changes that narrative, somebody changes that story and how it's seen because of marketing purposes. So I'm really kind of weary about that. How much control are these Indigenous artists really going to have over these stories, and how much is it going to change before we actually get to see the final product? And are they going to include these characters in their upcoming Marvel stories? So I guess that's the things that concern me. It's great to have that starting point, but it really needs to be well thought out and make sure that that the message and the artistry isn't tainted in any way.
And what about you, Sonya?
Well, a lot of my friends are in it, Rebecca, Jeffrey, and Darcy, and I was like, and not me. I was so annoyed. But yeah, I was really happy for them. But I do feel what Noetta said about because when it gets to that type of level, when it gets to like the upper echelon of the creative community, how much say do they really have in terms of including certain aspects of the background of a native character? Like, because it's why I like working in my own creations, just because you have that freedom, but I still would sell my soul to write for Superman. And so it's just like sometimes you do have to decide what's important to you the most, like what's one line you will not cross. And I do trust a lot of the creators in that book and the artists in that book to know where that line is for them. And yeah, like I'm really excited to read it, and I would like totally be gaga to have my name in that book as well. And I'm really cautiously optimistic about it.
And what about you, Kayla?
For me, when I first got the news, it was kind of like a big surprise, and then I saw the names, and it just kind of like, I'm a self-published comic book artist / writer. It just gave hope, that our stories and our voices, are becoming more mainstream. But you also, what Noetta and Sonya said, the concern that will it be done right, or will it be done like, respectfully as possible? But, on the other side, I'm very hopeful that this starts like a change, kind of like when Black Panther came out, it just started this like trend of Afrofuturism, or Black-led stories, Black-created stories. And, I'm not saying that the upcoming Indigenous Voices by Marvel is going to have that same effect, but I hope it at least, just by it existing, more and more people who are non-Indigenous and maybe not like knowing of our voices and of our content will at least now be like, I wonder if there's more stuff like this. So I'm excited for it. Little wary, but overall it's kind of like a nice big first step.
Yeah, I echo all of your sentiments on this. I am super excited because so many people that I admire and I love their work, they're a part of this. And like Sonya, I'm just thinking, what about me? But, I think it kind of really is going to help elevate our voices. Because, we've been creative comics like since the beginning. We're original comic creators and storytellers. And we've just never had our contributions acknowledged within even mainstream pop culture right now. I was so amazed to discover that Doom, which is a game that I grew up playing, had an Indigenous creator. And learning that, I was like, whoa, what? And, also kind of discovering like our native superheroes and our native comic book creators. So that leads to my next question is, what are some of the native comic created comics that you enjoy, and what native superheroes do you love or would really like to see kind of cross over into mainstream and being picked up for mainstream comic houses like Marvel? And I'll throw this one to Kayla first.
It's a big question, and if I'm being honest, I kind of don't have a lot of knowledge regarding some native characters in comic books, even though I'm a native comic book artist. The one that first popped to mind was Dani Moonstar, and that's because like I have a friend who like really likes her, You know, I've seen so many people, like so many Native people cosplaying her, and like I know New Mutants came out, but you know, we all know that movie didn't do very well. So hopefully with like, you know, what we talked about, the Marvel Indigenous voices, they could perhaps, you know, revisit her and maybe do a solo run of her comics as well. And then maybe just like branching out with characters that were seen as sidekicks or side characters. You know, it'd be interesting to hear more about their stories as well. And then, yeah.
And Sonya?
Well, I'm more of a DC person, so like the characters that I specifically think about in terms of who I want to see more of are characters like Equinox, who is like Kree, mostly because like I'm obsessed with more Kree people being out there, so that's one of my things. I also was really like, if anyone from DC is listening, I always wanted to write a Green Lantern short story about the first Earth Green Lantern, and that being a prehistory Cree person who is in Cree. Their name is Greenleaf. And I really wanted to write about like, well, what would it be like to be a superhero and basically a cop of space in that time period, in that type of culture, in that type of world. And I always wanted to explore that idea because it's such a big thing to me, because I'm like, you can't tell me that the first Green Lantern of Earth was like this white pilot. There has to have been more. Like it's so like, that's the one story I want to tell. I also want to see more Equinox, who's like Justice League United stuff. So, and I think they just like did that thing where they like brought her out to say how inclusive they are, and then just put her in a closet somewhere.
Yep. And Noetta?
Unfortunately, I don't know a whole lot about, I mean, I know that there's Native heroes out there in different comics, but the ones that I know most of are Marvel, and I just know their names. I really haven't had a chance to really look into them. I'm not a comic book person. I'm just now getting into it. So I'm a late starter, I'll put it that way. But the ones that I think the one I'm most interested in, though, is Echo, just because I saw the cover today, and I know that's the story that Rebecca is going to be writing. So very interested in her story, and I know that she is also an Avenger at one point, and I just really want to see more about how she fits into that whole scheme of hero, and also, I guess, how she balances those two worlds of being Indigenous and being the superhero. So it's really interesting to me now that all these characters are coming out.
It's really true. Like I've recently just started getting into like our Indigenous comic creators over like the last 5 years as being part of a tribe called Geek and highlighting our Native creators. And you know, the one that I'm the most fond of is Tribal Force, because it's the first Native superhero team. And I met John Proudstar at the first Indigenous Comic-Con, and you know, I thought this was a new thing. I thought this was a new comic book, a new group of superheroes. And then to find out that these were created around the year that I was born. So it took him almost 20 years for people to start noticing Tribal Force. And I was like, whoa, like this is tripping me out that this team hasn't got more push, especially, or being picked up by mainstream comic houses, because it's a really well written series of stories featuring Native superheroes. And I think in most recent days, you know, I really like Captain Paiute. And I really love that Native superhero because in order to use his superpowers, he has to learn about how they connect to his tribal culture. And so like if he wants to use water powers, then he has to be mindful of conserving water, of being a water protector, while also being able to harness that power to, you know, defeat the villains. And he has to learn about how to be responsible for that water. And he can't use that power until he learns to respect it. And the same, so he has to learn how to, you know, work with the earth. He has to learn about that connection it has to his people before he can harness those powers. So I really love that because, you know, it kind of teaches our youth, like, to get them interested, like there's power in the knowledge that we have in our culture. Like we won't necessarily have, you know, water bending superpowers or anything like that, but there's so much power in that. So I really love that comic just because of that. But, you know, it's amazing to see many of our stories are being told through comics these days. I don't know if you guys have had the opportunity to read Moonshot or 150 Years Retold, because it's so amazing to see Indigenous futurisms and to see Native superheroes and to see our history being reimagined, recreated. It's such an interesting thing to me because, I think as growing up as a creator, I always thought of like the mainstream superheroes like Marvel and DC. I never really thought that, we can create our own superhero. So I think that's one of the things I love the most is, yes, we're starting to reimagine mainstream characters and really fix the representation with them, but we're also starting to create our own and forge our own path. So I really love that. And so my next question is, what is the one thing that you really do hope to see more of in terms of representation? What genre would you like to see more Natives being a part of? Because I know, like, when it comes to Native representation, we're always put in the past. Like, we don't exist past the 1900s for a lot of people when they think of adding us into film. So what genres would you like to see Natives being more a part of? And I'll throw this one over to Noetta first.
I want to see more comedy, to be honest. I feel like that there's a lot of really dramatic and very heavy content for Native like film and television right now. But I also know that writers like Sierra Teller, who is writing her own comedy with Ed Helms right now. So I'm really excited about that, especially since I know how funny Indians can be, and it's just something I feel like that maybe could input us into more modern situations, more future situations. And I always want to see Natives do well in every genre, but I think we definitely need more comedy.
I would love the comedy too, because I know that we have Native comedy writers. And, one of the things I would love to see is a Native comedy, a sitcom starting with Natives driving into LA from a reservation somewhere, but driving their car backward because the transmission has gone out, and kind of, playing back to those smoke signal days, because I think that's something that Natives would totally do. We just drive into LA backward. And Kayla Shaggy, what about you?
It's okay. I know I mentioned it before, but I would really like to see more of us in horror, not as like the victim, but kind of like as the hero. Like maybe there could be some sort of like social commentary horror where it's like the Native characters have to fight off the curse of the white people instead, make it like an interesting inversion of that setup that we often see. I would also like to see Natives in fantasy more, like I'll go on Twitter and I follow like different artists, and I think someone did a trend of like, we should do more POC elves, and then someone drew like a Native elf, and I just thought like, because I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, I was like, oh, that's such a cool concept. I wish we could see more of that. But yeah, horror and fantasy would be the ones I'm looking forward to the most.
I echo the horror too, and I've always wondered why there isn't more Native horror, because we have the scariest stories, the scariest folklore. Like, I lived in a town where as soon as the sun went down, everybody starts closing their blinds, and you don't open the door unless somebody tells you that they're calling or coming over, because, you don't know what spirit is going to be at the door. So, it's kind of interesting how we haven't had a lot of more horror. But also, when you look at horror too, I think a lot of it is common sense. Natives have a lot of common sense. We see spirits or we see something not wrong, and we're like calling grandma and getting that sage and cedar and prayer going and not messing with it, We're just like, oh, nope, okay, we got to respect this. We're going to walk away. Meanwhile, in regular horror, it's like, oh, there's a spirit. Let's go aggravate it. Let's go taunt it. So I think I would love to see more Native horror. And I don't know if you guys have read The Only Good Indian by Stephen Graham Jones, but holy cow. That book has given me nightmares about elk. I don't even know if I can eat elk anymore because I'm terrified of what will happen. But Sonya, what about you?
I echo horror. I recently watched Blood Quantum, which is a native zombie movie, and though like it had its good points, there were parts I didn't really get behind, just because I like, for one, it's by a male creator, so I was like, some parts, like the total abandoning of a female character just made me upset, and I was like, damn it, she could have done cool stuff, not only because she was played by an actress I know, so like that was why, but I am a little biased, but I've always loved horror. Like, horror is one, and it's so popular with Native people that I never understood why we don't create it more. I've always wanted to tell this one zombie story about like one infection that starts attacking everybody, and this little girl has to defend herself. I always like, and have it be an allegory to alcohol. Just like, not have it be heavy-handed in terms of the horror, because that was the one thing I had a problem with Blood Quantum, was how heavy-handed like the native versus white part of it was. That's the only part I didn't like about it. But I also like really want us in sci-fi, like so much so that I am like running to the set of Star Trek Discovery to have them have a native person on their set. I'm like, it's Toronto, it's treaty territory, let us in. So I really want sci-fi as a non-Chakotay way, if that makes sense. Like, so like, have us just be there as engineers, as captains, and as security personnel, just because it when we are included in these genres, it's often in such a stereotyped way. So I really hope that we can go past that, where a captain can just be a captain, the way that what's her face, she plays the Empress on Star Trek Discovery, the way she is allowed to just be a captain, not a Mongolian captain, or I think she's from somewhere else. But anyway, I can't remember. Sorry, I'm gonna kill myself later, or not. Sorry, I was saying that. But Michelle Yeoh, that's her name. Yes. So Michelle Yeoh is allowed to be a captain without having to represent her ancestry, if that makes sense. So yeah, sorry for saying that. Like, that just jumped out at me. But yeah, like, that's how I feel. Sci-fi and horror, please.
Oh, I'm definitely digging the sci-fi too, because I've seen so many stories that put us into the future. I would love to see them on screen. And I don't know if you guys have seen some of the movies. There's a really short film called Monster Slayer that kind of tackles the Navajo twins. And it is so amazing. I would love for them to get a bigger budget to bring that story to life, because I just watched that short little clip. And Kayla?
So I actually got to go to a screening of that, and I got to talk to one of the people working on it. She was the casting director. And she told me that they did have a GoFundMe for a bigger series and a film, but there was no funding from the community. They were all for it, and I just want to interject, if you really want to see projects like succeed, and this is for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, please fund those small creators. Like, whenever an order comes into my store, someone buys one of my books, Indigenous futurism, I just love it, and then I recommend them to other creators who are maybe doing similar things or different things. Please fund them, because we really do want to make these projects. It just takes a lot of support to get them off the ground. But yeah, I'm with you. I really wanted Monster Slayer to succeed, but I think they ended that project because it didn't raise the funds.
Oh, that's so horrible to learn. And Noetta, I know you had to raise your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, that some of these projects are being made because we have a film festival here in Oklahoma called the Native Crossroads Film Festival. And last year we did a futurism theme, or not last year, it got canceled last year, the year before COVID. And there was some amazing futurism, and there was one that stuck out to me. It was from Iceland, an all Indigenous cast. It was so trippy. It was about time and space and future and past, and how it all collided together. And it was just an amazing, I can't even think of the title of it. I'm trying to right now. It was in the spoken in all an Indigenous tongue through the whole entire movie. It was a beautiful, and the effects were just amazing. So, we definitely need more content like that. And if I can think of that title, I will put it up on the chat. But it's just a testament to what we can do even on a small budget. So if we had a larger budget, it would be amazing. So yeah, I totally agree with Kayla. We definitely need to fund these creators and let them tell their stories.
Absolutely. And, that just kind of reminded me, if you are interested in Indigenous sci-fi or horror films, you could go to www.atribecaledgeek.com. And I actually do have 2 articles that list a couple of our sci-fi films and horror films that are available online. And I think that is so important because there's so many wonderful stories that just don't have the budget. Monster Slayer was one of my favorites, but the other was a movie called Violet. And I loved the horror because it kind of reminded me of Japanese horror. And it had so much promise, and the funding kind of got shortcut. So they had to make it into a short film, but there was so much more to that would be amazing. But yeah, if you guys are interested in those films, and we're kind of winding up. So if anybody has questions, just ask away.
I'm actually going to pop in because I'm monitoring the chat. So if you don't mind, I'll just go ahead and ask the questions that people are. Awesome. So let's see here. Someone did ask about the film Blood Quantum. So you did talk about that. Do the panelists have any favorite Indigenous fiction they'd love to see turned into a comic?
Oh, that's a hard one. I'll start with Sonya on that one.
I think, well, Johnny J mentioned Stephen, like his book, The Only Good Indian, was really cool. I love that one. Like it was like some of his stuff is so good. Like if you've never read it, like go out and find it, because I met him at New York Comic Con, and he is like, I think he's better than Stephen King personally. So somebody cap that part and send it to him right now, so he can be very happy to hear that. But yeah, like I would love to see some of his stuff in comics. I would love to adapt it for a film. That would be some of the stuff I'd want to do.
Kayla?
I can't really think of one off the top of my head, unfortunately. But I think what the Only Good Indians, I think that'd be really interesting to explore within a comics, visual and text. That'd be cool.
Okay, Noetta?
The first thing that came to my mind was Trail of Lightning series by Rebecca Roanhorse.
Oh yes.
Just because it's such it's the futurism we need, I think, coming from such a really good place, and so the social commentary on it is really well written as well. But then I also think I was trying to think of something done by what's his name, by Lee Francis, Six Killer. I think that would be a really good movie. So, and then I put that movie, and it's called Among Us in the Land of Our Shadows. That's from Greenland, so look into that. It's really good.
I agree. The one thing I would love to see kind of adapted into film is Dear Woman. And that's from Native Realities Publishing as well, because I really loved how they took this Native folklore and made her into a good guy, a protector of women in such a fascinating way. So for me, it would be Dear Woman and also Tribal Force. I would love to see that brought to life in film.
Awesome. So as I look at all of the questions that are coming in, a lot of them are for recommendations. So we have people want to know what books and movies do you guys recommend? What video games would you recommend? And then what kind of resources would you suggest that we follow so that we can sort of keep an eye on what's new and coming out?
Sorry. Yeah, it's okay. Kayla go. Kayla, you can go first if you want.
Okay, I'll go real quick. For Indigenous comics, I would recommend the Indigenous Comics Collective. It's a kind of like a new group, but we just started out, but we do have like a fairly large number of members, and it's just, we're on Twitter, and I think we have a website at the moment, but it'd be a really good spot to check out some up and coming self-published Indigenous comic book creators. But that would be my recommendation.
My Rex would probably be Rebecca Rowanhorse, but I don't think she needs as much Rex as some other people. But no, I love her. Sorry, she is one of my favorite writers right now. Who else? Darcy Little Badger is one of my favorites. I also really love all the films that are coming out of Australia by Indigenous people. Like my favorite Indigenous film of the last few years was The Sapphires, which is about a group of Aborigine women who start a doo-wop group and tour Vietnam in the 60s. And I just really love some of the stuff that, even though Australia is a lot more racist than Canada, I find that their filmmaking is a lot more cutting edge. And so I hope that Canada can catch up to them one day. So check out The Sapphires. It's really, really, really good.
I may be a little biased, but I am going to recommend When Rivers Were Trails as video games. And I know I'm biased, but here's a challenge. If you can find me in that video game, I will literally send you one of my shirts that I designed. If you can find me in that game, because it's a challenge, because I didn't even know until I was told. And I played that game for probably about 2 weeks straight when it first was released. So there's a challenge for you. And I would also recommend looking into Native Realities. They have a great collection of comic books, and they're always putting new things out. Six Killer that Noetta mentioned is phenomenal, and I'm so in love with that. And also, you know, she mentioned, Sonya mentioned Darcy Little Badger, and she just released a new book called Alaxo, which is amazing, and it's already climbing the indie bestseller list. It's one of the recommended books on Amazon. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. And as for resources, you can always come to a tribe called geek.com, and also look up Noetta with Geek Girl Authority, because she does such phenomenal work for them. And her episode recaps for a lot of our favorite shows are so detailed and so amazing. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Thank you. I do specialize more on television and films, but I know one of the games that I actually got a chance to play was the Never Alone. I think it's PlayStation. Yeah, PlayStation, and I think there's an Xbox game. It is based on, it's I can't say this, Inupiaq tale about a boy going on a quest to save his people during a blizzard. And you basically just kind of, it's like a story. It's just a story. You're just, you know, you're the little boy and you're going through all of these little trials to try to get food and get it back to your people and everything. So, but as far as television goes, you know, we have Rutherford Falls is coming out hopefully soon on the Peacock Network, and it is has a writing team of 12, but 5 of them are Native American and First Nations writers, and it includes Sierra Taylor Ornelas, Bobby Wilson, and I can't even remember, Janice Schnell, and Taz. Is that how you say her name? But they this is one of the first Native writing teams in television. You know, that's really kind of a big step for Native writers. So I definitely you know, look for it. And keep your eye on Geek Girl Authority. I have a column called Indigener Wire, and if you want to go back and look at some of my old, I've interviewed people like Deborah Jacobs, who is also in Netflix's The Order season 2 right now, and hopefully will be in the next season of American Gods. And also Kaliko Kauahi, who is gearing up for season 6 or 7 of Superstore. So she's also a great person. I love that woman. She's so funny. But yeah, just check me out.
Thank you. All right, I think we have about time for maybe one more question. Let's see. There's questions about Twitter, but I think that you guys have, let's see. Oh, this is, I'm interested to know what themes or characters you all as Indigenous creators are working on in your own projects.
Oh. I guess we should throw this one over to Kayla first.
So currently I'm working on a comic book. I mentioned it earlier. It's about Indigenous futurisms. It's called The Sixth World. There's 3 issues out currently, and the main character is a Danet girl, young Danet woman living on Mars 200 years in the future. And it kind of dwells into how she's kind of living on this like neo colony, how she loses like her living relative, and how she like tries to how she grieves from that. And then she also kind of like she inherits this like suit from her grandmother that dies, and it kind of like it's a journey into how she understands there's more to her life than she thought that there was. So there's giant bugs, there's cool fight scenes, there's some commentary on what it's like being a native person in the future, and that's what I've been working on, and I'm currently working on the 4th issue. So thank you for letting me talk about it.
Hey, and Sonya?
Well, I'm currently doing a rewatch podcast of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The podcast is called Live from the Pool House, and it basically, I do it with my friend T.L. Foster, who is a Black person in Florida, and it focuses on the experience I had with not seeing myself in the stuff I love, so really latching on to Black media. So it's a really deep dive into that stuff. I'm also working on a feature film called WW She, which is about a group of teenage girls that start a wrestling promotion on their reserve. So I am currently in pre-production for that movie. We're writing the script right now. I got a few pro wrestlers who were interested in appearing in it as long as they did not play wrestlers. So I'm really excited to do that just because I've seen how pro wrestling is such a big thing in Native communities that I could not believe the story hadn't been told before. So I like to describe it as if the movie The Wrestlers at the end of their career, WWE focuses on why they get into it in the first place. And a lot of my work focuses on girls who have goals to just leave their home communities but realize that they're needed there. So that's what my work focuses on mostly. And sisters, for some reason. I always write about sisters.
Noetta?
In the very, very little time I have to write, I've been doing a lot. I'm highly influenced by The Walking Dead right now, maybe because I'm covering all 3 series, but it really is a story about a family who live close to their native community and how they've kind of come together and to survive whatever the pandemic is that I come up with. But I'd really, really like to get into some kind of futurism, some kind of space type of science fiction type of stories. And I'm kind of, it's milling around in there. Just got to put it down on paper somewhere. So, but that's really, I haven't like published anything, and I'm a little scared to, to be honest, but eventually I will.
I kind of echo Noetta because, I work on a lot of different things. Most of the things that I work on is talking about representation of Natives in the media. But one of the things that I'm really trying to work on right now is I have a talk that I give called Surviving the Zombie Apocalypse Red Style. So in case you guys haven't noticed, Natives love zombies. And I think a lot of that is because we see it as part of our experience as having survived an apocalypse already. So, I have this talk and I'm trying to figure out a way to bring it into a web series. That way I could kind of go into more detail as far as talking about traditional medicines, communications, strongholds. But my favorite is traditional weaponry and being able to teach others how to do traditional weapons, how to make them, and bring that into kind of like an online masterclass. But that's one of the things that I'm working on right now.
And sadly, I think that puts us at time, guys.
Ooh.
So I guess we're going to wrap up. Did anyone have any sort of like last comments that they wanted to sort of shout out from like our panelists? Did you guys have any sort of last minute things you wanted to?
Follow me at honey_child, please, on Twitter. Like, I am always active on there.
You can find me at NettaBear13 on Twitter and Instagram. And thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
I have one. If you look up Kayla Shaggy Dog Gallery, you'll find my website and all the different social media stuff I do. I am working on a virtual convention called Indigeshow. We just raised all the funds for our Kickstarter recently. But it will be like a big show of speakers doing some videos and artists selling their works, and they're all going to be Indigenous creatives. Me and Johnny J will be a part of it.
And you can find me on Twitter at Johnny J. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. And you can also find me at a tribe called geek.com. And yeah, I think that's about it.